Senator Schiff, on March 2, 2019, you appeared on CBS's Face the Nation, and you stated, and I quote, "I can tell you that the evidence of collusion and conspiracy is in plain sight." Senator John Kennedy put down the transcript and looked across the hearing room at his colleague from California. The Mueller report was released 6 weeks later, 448 pages, 2 years of investigation, 40 FBI agents, 500 search warrants, $32 million spent, and it found no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. None. Kennedy removed his reading glasses and held them loosely in one hand. So here is my question, Senator, and I would appreciate a straight answer. Were you lying then, or were you just wrong about everything you claim to have seen with your own eyes? Adam Schiff's face was stone. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on Kennedy with an intensity that had withered millions of witnesses during his years as a prosecutor. But he wasn't a prosecutor anymore today. He was the one being questioned. The Senate hearing room was completely silent. Even the photographers had stopped clicking. Schiff opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. 4 hours earlier, Adam Schiff had walked into that same hearing room with the confidence of a man who had survived everything Washington could throw at him. His charcoal suit was impeccable, his posture perfect. At 64 years old, he still carried himself like the federal prosecutor he'd once been, shoulders back, chin up, every movement deliberate and controlled. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, his expression serious but serene, the face of a man who believed history would vindicate him. He was newly elected to the United States Senate, having won California's open seat in a landslide after 14 years in the House, including his star turn as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. He had finally ascended to what he considered his rightful place in the upper chamber. This hearing, his first major appearance as a senator, was supposed to be a victory lap. The hearing was officially titled Maintaining Public Trust in Intelligence Oversight, and Schiff had been invited as an expert witness, giving his experience running the House Intelligence Committee. The invitation had come from the Democratic chairman, who expected Schiff to deliver a masterclass on the importance of congressional oversight and the ongoing threats to American democracy. Schiff expected that too. His staff had prepared extensive remarks about Russian interference, the lessons of the Trump years, and the vital role of truth-tellers in government. He plans to reference his book, perhaps hint at future ambitions, and remind the American public why he had become one of the most recognized faces in the Democratic Party. The media setup was substantial. CNN, MSNBC, and the major networks had all sent crews. Reporters lined the press gallery, many breathed of them. The same political journalists who had recklessly covered Schiff's every pronouncement during the Russia investigation. They were expecting a triumphant performance. Schiff paused at the entrance to survey the Dollars and Cents room. Democratic senators smiled warmly. Senator Warner gave him a thumbs up. Senator Heinrich nodded with respect. On the Republican side, the reception was cooler but not openly hostile. Most of them were reviewing their notes or conferring with staff. Senator Rubio briefly up then returned to his papers. Senator Cotton's expression was unreadable. And at the far end of the dais sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Kennedy was shuffling through an unusually large stack of folders, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He seemed completely absorbed in his papers, barely registering Schiff's entrance. An aide leaned in to whisper something, and Kennedy nodded without looking up. Schiff's eyes lingered on Kennedy for just a moment. He knew the senator's reputation, the folksy demeanor, the southern drawl, the deceptively sharp questions. But Schiff had faced hostile questioners before. He had stared down Devin Nunes, Jim Jordan, and the entire Republican conference during impeachment. He had handled hundreds of press interviews, thousands of tough questions. A country lawyer from Louisiana didn't concern him. Kennedy switched up and caught Schiff's eye. He smiled warmly and gave a small nod of recognition. Schiff nodded back and took his seat at the witness table. He had no idea what was coming. Chairman Warner called the hearing to order at 10 a.m. Today's hearing will examine the critical importance of maintaining public trust in our intelligence oversight processes. We've invited Senator Adam Schiff, who previously served as chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, to share his insights and experience. Senator Schiff, thank you for joining us. You may proceed with your opening statement. Schiff activated his microphone and arranged his notes with the precision of a man who had done this millions of times before. Thank you, Chairman Warner, Vice Chairman Rubio, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to discuss a topic that has defined much of my public service: the sacred responsibility of congressional oversight over our intelligence community. He launched into his prepared remarks, and they were, by any measure, polished. His delivery was prosecutorial, measured, authoritative, building his case point by point. When I became chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in 2019, our democracy was facing unprecedented challenges. A foreign adversary had attacked our elections. There were serious questions about whether the President of the United States had been compromised. The American people deserved answers, and it was our constitutional duty to find them. He paused for effect, scanning the room. What I saw during those years in classified briefings, in witness testimony, in the documentary evidence, confirmed my worst fears about the threat we faced. And despite unprecedented obstruction, despite attacks on my integrity and my patriotism, I never wavered in my commitment to the truth. Schiff's voice took on a righteous edge. Some of my colleagues didn't want to see the evidence. Some chose to look away. Some actively worked to obstruct our investigation. But history will judge who was on the right side, who defended our democracy, and who enabled its subversion. He addressed the Republican side of the dais directly. I was censured by the House of Representatives last year. Some of my colleagues voted to officially condemn me for telling the truth, but I wear that censure as a badge of honor, because it proves I was over the target. It proves that those who sought to cover up the truth saw me as a threat. The Democratic senators nodded approvingly. Senator Kaine was practically beaming. The work of intelligence oversight has never been more important, Schiff continued. Foreign adversaries continue to target our elections. Disinformation spreads faster than ever, and there are those, even within our own government, who will undermine the very institutions that protect us. He concluded with a flourish. I spent 14 years in the House fighting to protect our democracy. I intended to spend my time in the Senate doing the same, because the threats haven't gone away, and neither have I. Schiff sat back, satisfied with his performance. The opening statement had hit every note: righteous, defiant, forward-looking. The media would have plenty of quotes for the evening news. At the far end of the dais, Senator Kennedy made a small note on his legal pad. He still hadn't looked up. The Democratic question followed the expected script. Senator Warner led off with softballs. Senator Schiff, you faced enormous personal attacks during your time as intelligence chairman. How did you maintain your focus on the mission? Schiff delivered a 4-minute answer about sacrifice, duty, and the importance of standing firm against intimidation. He mentioned the death threats, the security details, the impact on his family. His voice caught slightly when discussing the toll it had taken. Perfectly calibrated emotions. Senator Heinrich asked about lessons learned. What should this committee take away from your experience overseeing the Russia investigation? This gave Schiff an opportunity to renew 2016 to 2019 at length. He spoke about the mountain of evidence his committee had gathered, the unprecedented obstruction they had faced, the unanswered questions that still remained. He implied, without quite saying, that Trump had been guilty of everything but had been protected by partisan allies. Senator King inquired about the current threat landscape. Schiff pivoted seamlessly into remarks about ongoing Russian operations, Chinese espionage, and the dangers of domestic actors who echo foreign propaganda. With each exchange, Schiff grew more comfortable. He began interrupting questions to provide additional context. His answers grew longer, more expansive. He began referencing his book. He hinted at important work, still to be done in terms that clearly suggested higher ambitions. Between questions, he stepped in at the Republican side with barely concealed disdain. These were the people who had defended Trump, who had attacked him, who had voted to censure him. He looked forward to watch them try to land a blow. Kennedy was still reviewing his folders, occasionally marking something with a pen. He hadn't asked a single question. Senator Rubio asked a mildly probing question about the balance between transparency and classification. Schiff handled it easily, giving a nuanced answer about the challenges of informing the public while protecting sources and methods. Senator Cotton asked about the Intelligence Committee's procedures. Another easy answer. The morning wore on. The cameras kept rolling. Schiff kept performing. Finally, Chairman Warner looked at his list. Senator Kennedy, you're recognized for 10 minutes. Kennedy activated his microphone and looked up from his folders for the first time in over an hour. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He removed his reading glasses, cleaned them slowly with his tie, and put them back on. When he spoke, his Louisiana accent was thick and warm. Senator Schiff, congratulations on your election to the Senate. Welcome to this side of the Capitol. I know you've been wanting to join us for a while. Schiff nodded cautiously. Thank you, Senator. Now, you just gave us quite a history lesson, Russia. Election interference, threats to democracy, and I appreciate that. You were chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You saw things most of us didn't see. Classified briefings, intelligence reports. The real stuff. Kennedy paused, picking up a folder. So I want to ask you about something you said. Actually, something you said many times between 2017 and 2019. You made a lot of television appearances, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, Sunday shows, cable news morning programs. You were everywhere. Schiff straightened slightly. I believed it was important to keep the public informed. I'm sure you did. Kennedy opened the folder, and in those appearances, you made some very specific claims, very confident claims, about evidence you said you had personally seen. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. I've got transcripts here of 47 separate television appearances where you claim to have direct evidence or more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia 47 times. Kennedy began reading. March 19th, 2017, meet the press. You said, I can't go into particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now. December 3rd, 2017. CNN State of the Union. You said, the Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. February 14th, 2018, PBS NewsHour, you said, there is ample evidence of collusion in plain sight. March 2nd, 2019, CBS Face the Nation, you said, I can tell you that the evidence of collusion and conspiracy is in plain sight. Kennedy looked up. Senator, did you make those statements? Schiff's expression had hardened. I stand by my assessment that there was significant evidence of collusion. I didn't ask about your assessment. I asked if you made those statements. You said you saw evidence. You said it was more than circumstantial. You said it was in plain sight. Did you say those things? Yes. But the context. Thank you. Kennedy made a note. So, between 2017 and 2019, you repeatedly told the American public on national television, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, that you had seen direct evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. You said it was in plain sight. You said it was more than circumstantial. He set down the transcripts. Is that an accurate summary of your public statements? Schiff leaned into the microphone. I believed then, and I believe now, that the evidence supports those characteristics. Senator, I'm not asking what you believed. I'm asking what you said. Did you tell the American people you had seen evidence of collusion? Yes or no? A pause. Yes. Kennedy nodded slowly. Good. I just wanted to establish what you told the American people. He picked up another folder, thicker than the first. Now, let's talk about what evidence actually showed. Kennedy opened the folder and pulled out a bound document. Senator Schiff, on April 18th, linguistic. Special Counsel Robert Mueller released his report, 448 pages, the result of nearly 2 years of investigation. 40 FBI agents assigned to the case, approximately 2,800 subpoenas issued, 500 search warrants executed, $32 million in taxpayer money spent. He held up the document. This is Volume 1, which addresses the question of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. I want to read you what Mr. Mueller concluded. Kennedy found the page he was looking for. Page 2, and I quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." End quote. He looked up at Schiff. Did not establish, after 2 years, 40 FBI agents, $32 million, and 500 search warrants, the special counsel did not establish conspiracy or coordination. Kennedy sat down the report. Senator, you told the American people the evidence was in plain sight. You said you had seen it with your own eyes. You said it was more than circumstantial. And then Robert Mueller, with all the resources of the federal government, spent 2 years looking for that evidence and didn't find it. The Mueller report documents extensive contacts, Schiff began. I'm not asking about contacts. I'm asking about conspiracy, collusion. The thing you said was in plain sight. Kennedy's voice remains friendly. But there was steel underneath. The Mueller report says it wasn't there. Were you wrong? Or was Robert Mueller wrong? Schiff shifted in his seat. The report documents numerous links between the campaign and Russia, links, contacts, meetings. Kennedy waved his hand. Senator, I've got links to my garbage man. I see him every Tuesday. That doesn't mean I'm conspiring with him. A few people in the gallery exclaimed. Kennedy didn't smile. You didn't tell the American people there were links. You told them there was collusion. You told them there was conspiracy. You told them you had seen the evidence, and Robert Mueller said it wasn't there. Kennedy pulled out another document. But here's what's really interesting, Senator. In 2020, after much legal wrangling, the transcripts of closed-door testimony before your committee were finally released. Behind closed doors. He opened the new folder. And those transcripts show something remarkable. The same officials who testified before your committee, under oath in private, said they had no direct evidence of collusion. But, in public, they implied the opposite. Kennedy read from the transcripts. James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence, in his closed-door testimony, he said, I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign, or someone in it, was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. That's what he said under oath, behind closed doors. But in public, Director Clapper went on television, repeatedly showed there was evidence. He called the president's behavior treasonous. He implied he had seen things he couldn't discuss. Kennedy pulled out another transcript. John Brennan, former director of the CIA, in his closed-door testimony, he said, I don't know if I received information about any collusion between Trump and the Russians. He said he didn't know under oath. But in public, Director Brennan accused the president of treason. He said Trump was entirely in the pocket of Putin. He went on television hundreds of times implying he had evidence. Kennedy spread the transcripts across his desk. Susan Rice, Samantha Power, Ben Rhodes, Loretta Lynch, the same pattern over and over. Behind closed doors, under oath, They said they had no direct evidence. In public, they implied the opposite. He looked directly at Schiff. Senator, you had these transcripts, you conducted these interviews, you heard these witnesses say under oath that they had no direct evidence of collusion. And then you went on television 47 times, that I've counted, and told the American people you had seen evidence. Why didn't you release those transcripts? Schiff's face had gone tight. The transcripts contained classified information. They contained testimony that contradicted your public statements. That's what they contained. Kennedy's folksy tone had disappeared. You fought to keep them classified for over a year. Director of National Intelligence Grenell finally declassified them in May 2020. You didn't want them released? Why? The classification process requires. Senator, you were the chairman. You could have worked to declassify those transcripts. You could have told the American people what your own witnesses said under oath. Instead, you kept them secret while going on television, claiming you had seen evidence that those same witnesses said didn't exist. Kennedy gathered the transcripts into a neat pile. That's not oversight, Senator. That's not protecting democracy. That's propaganda. You used your position as Intelligence Committee Chairman to spread a narrative you knew wasn't supported by the evidence. He leaned forward. And you want to talk about threats to democracy? How about a senior official using classified information or the pretense of classified information to manipulate public opinion? How about telling the American people you've seen evidence that doesn't exist? Kennedy's voice dropped lower. That's a threat to democracy, Senator, and you're the one who did it. Chairman Warner shifted uncomfortably. Senator Kennedy, I'd remind you to direct your questions. Mister, it's cell phones. Chairman, I am asking questions. I'm asking Senator Schiff to explain the discrepancy between what his witnesses said under oath and what he told the American public. That seems like a relevant question for a hearing about public trust. Warner had no response. Kennedy continued. Senator Schiff, let's talk about the FISA applications. In early 2018, Congressman Devin Nunes released a memo alleging that the FBI had abused the FISA process to surveil Carter Page, a Trump campaign advisor. Do you remember that? Schiff's posture stiffened. I remember a misleading partisan document that endangered sources and methods. You wrote a counter-memo, didn't you? The Schiff memo. And in that memo, you said the Nunes memo was deliberately misleading. You said the FBI and Department of Justice had acted appropriately in seeking the FISA warrant. You said there was no abuse. Schiff nodded cautiously. That was my assessment based on reviewing the underlying documents. Let me read from your memo. Kennedy pulled out the Schiff memo, the declassified version that had been released in February 2018. You wrote, and I quote, FBI and DOJ officials did not abuse the FISA process, omit material information, or subvert this vital tool to spy on the Trump campaign. He continued reading. You wrote, the FBI made only narrow use of the Steele dossier. You wrote, the FBI provided additional information obtained through multiple independent sources that corroborated Steele's reporting. Kennedy looked up. Senator, do you stand by those statements today? Schiff hesitated. The context of my memo. Do you stand by those statements? Yes or no? I stand by the overall conclusion that that's not what I asked. Kennedy picked up another document, much thicker than the Schiff memo. This is the report of the Department of Justice Inspector General, released in December 2019. Inspector General Michael Horowitz spent over a year investigating the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. He examined those exact FISA applications you said were proper. Kennedy opened the report, and he found, let me count them here, 17 significant errors or omissions 17. He began reading. The FBI failed to inform the FISA court that Christopher Steele's primary subsource disputed Steele's characterization of their conversations. The FBI knew the subsource had contradicted Steele, and they didn't tell the court. The FBI failed to disclose that Carter Page had been an approved operational contact for another U.S. government agency, that he had actually helped the CIA, not worked against American interests. The FBI misled the court about the reliability of the Steele dossier. They said Steele's reporting had been corroborated, when in fact, key claims had been contradicted. The FBI omitted exculpatory information about George Papadopoulos that undercut the premise of the investigation. The FBI continued to seek FISA renewals even after evidence emerged that undermined their original claims. Kennedy looked up. 17 errors. Senator, all in one direction, all making the case for surveillance look stronger than it was. Does that sound like the FBI acted appropriately? Schiff's jaw tightened. The Inspector General also found that the investigation was properly predicated. I didn't ask about predication, I asked about your memo. Kennedy's voice sharpened. Your memo said the FBI made only narrow use of the Steele dossier. The Inspector General found it was central and essential to the FISA applications. Your memo said the FBI provided corroborating evidence. The Inspector General found they omitted exculpatory evidence. Your memo said there was no abuse. The Inspector General found 17 significant errors that you somehow missed, even though you had access to the same underlying documents. Kennedy spread the two documents side by side. So, either you didn't read the documents carefully, or you read them and decided to mislead the public anyway. Which is it, Senator? Schiff leaned into his microphone. The Inspector General's findings, while concerned, do not change the fundamental. Senator, yes or no, was your memo accurate? My memo accurately reflected. Was it accurate? 17 errors. You said no abuse. Were you right or wrong? Silence. I'll take that as an admission that you were wrong. Kennedy made a note. And yet, you've never corrected the record. You've never said my memo was inaccurate. You've never apologized for telling the American people the FBI acted properly when the Inspector General found 17 significant errors. He sat down his pen. That's the pattern, isn't it? Senator? You make confident claims. You're proven wrong. And you never, ever admit it. Kennedy consulted his notes and pulled out a new folder. Let's talk about impeachment. September 2019. You chaired the first public hearing about President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, and, in your opening statement, you read what you said was a summary of that call. Schiff's expression became guarded. I featured the essence of the conversation. Let me read what you said. Kennedy pulled out the transcript of that hearing. You put these words in President Trump's mouth. You said, and I quote, I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it. On this and on that. Kennedy looked up. Senator, did President Trump actually say those words on the call? Schiff shifted in his seat. I made it clear. It was a parody. You made it clear? Kennedy found another passage. Let me read your exact introduction. You said, it reads like a classic organized crime shakedown, shorn of its rambling character and in not so many words. This is the essence of what the president communicates. He set down the transcript. You said, this is the essence of what the president communicates, and then you made up words he never said, in an official congressional hearing. While you were chairman, on national television, Kennedy shook his head slowly. Senator, I was a lawyer for a long time. If I had stood up in court and read fake quotes to a jury, words that a witness never actually said, and claimed it was the essence of what they meant, I would have been sanctioned. I might have been disbarred. But you did it in Congress. You read fabricated quotes into the official record. And when people objected, you called it a parody. Schiff's voice rose slightly. The American people understood what I was doing. Did they? You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You were conducting an impeachment inquiry. You sat there in your official capacity and made up quotes. How were the American people supposed to know you were joking? Kennedy pulled out another document. Let's talk about the whistleblower. In September 2019, when the whistleblower complaint became public, you were asked whether your committee had had any contact with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. Do you remember what you said? Schiff was silent. Kennedy read from the transcript. September 17, 2019, you appeared on MSNBC. The host asked, "Have you heard from the whistleblower? Do you want to hear from the whistleblower?" And you said, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." End quote. He looked up. Was that statement true? Senator Schiff chose his words carefully. My statement was accurate in its context. Your committee staff had met with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. Your staff had discussed the substance of the allegations. Your staff had helped guide the whistleblower on the proper procedures for filing. You knew about the complaint before it was official. And you said, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." Kennedy leaned forward. That was a lie by omission at best, Senator. You knew your committee had contacted the whistleblower. You knew your staff had been involved, and you chose to hide that. My staff's contact was appropriate under. I didn't ask if it was appropriate. I asked why you hid it. Why didn't you say, my staff has had contact with the whistleblower? Why did you leave the impression that you knew nothing about the complaint until it was filed? Schiff said nothing. I'll tell you why, Kennedy continued. Because if the American people knew that your committee had helped shape the complaint, it would have looked like a setup. It would have looked coordinated. It would have undermined the narrative you were trying to create. So you hid it. You told a misleading statement on national television, and when you got caught, you said your statement was accurately accurate. Kennedy gathered the documents. Senator, do you see a pattern here? Because I do. When you wanted to push the Russia collusion narrative, you went on TV and claimed to have evidence you didn't have 47 times. When you wanted to discredit the Nunes memo, you wrote a counter-memo that turned out to be wrong on almost every significant point. When you wanted to conduct impeachment, you read fake quotes in an official hearing and called it parody. When you wanted to protect the whistleblower process, you misled the public about your committee's contacts. Kennedy's voice hardened. The pattern is this. Adam Schiff says whatever is necessary to achieve his political goals, regardless of whether it's true. And then, when he's caught, he claims he was misunderstood, or taken out of context, or engaged in parody. He looked directly at Schiff. And you want to lecture us about threats to democracy? Kennedy checked the clock and turned to a new folder. Senator Schiff, on June 21, 2023, the House of Representatives voted to censure you. The vote was 213 to 209. Do you recall that vote? Schiff's expression flickered with anger. I recall a partisan exercise. The resolution stated, and let me read this exactly, that you misled the American public about the Russia investigation, that you made false statements about evidence of collusion, that you spread false accusations that were unsupported by evidence. Kennedy held up the censure resolution. Your own colleagues, members of the United States House of Representatives, voted to officially condemn you for misleading the American people. This wasn't a newspaper editorial. This wasn't a cable news pundit. This was an official action of Congress. That vote was purely partisan. Senator, you spent 4 years accusing the President of the United States of being a Russian asset, of conspiring with a foreign adversary, of betraying his country. You made those accusations on television, in hearings, in official statements 47 times that I've documented, probably many more, and when the evidence proved you wrong, when the Mueller report came out, when the transcripts were released, when the Inspector General issued his findings, you didn't apologize. You didn't admit you were wrong. You just kept saying you were right, and everyone else was wrong. Kennedy set down the resolution. The censure wasn't partisan, Senator. It was accountability, something you're apparently not familiar with. He pulled out more documents. Now let's talk about how your party responded to that censure. Speaker Emerita Pelosi called the vote an abuse of process. That's true, but do you know what she didn't say? Kennedy looked at his notes. She didn't say you were telling the truth. She didn't defend your claims about evidence. She didn't say Adam Schiff was right about Russian collusion. She defended you against the process. She didn't defend your statements. In fact, Senator, I've done some research. I couldn't find a single Democratic leader who said, after the Mueller report, after the transcripts, after the Inspector General report, who said Adam Schiff was right about collusion. Not one. Kennedy paused. Why do you think that is, Senator? Why won't your own party say you were right? Schiff's voice was tight. My colleagues understand the work I did to protect. Your colleagues know what the Mueller report said. They know what the Inspector General found. They know what the transcripts showed, and none of them will say you were right because you weren't. Kennedy picked up the censure resolution again. The resolution also imposed a fine, $16 million, if I recall correctly. Did you pay that fine, Senator? I did not. The fine was unconstitutional, so you were censured by the House of Representatives for misleading the American public. You were fined, and you refused to pay. Kennedy shook his head. Just like you refused to admit you were wrong, just like you refused to apologize for spreading claims that weren't supported by evidence, just like you refused to release the transcripts that contradicted your public statements. He leaned forward. Is there anything you accept responsibility for, Senator? Anything at all in your entire career? Have you ever said, I was wrong, and I'm sorry? Schiff was silent for a long moment. I have always acted in what I believe to be the best interests of the country. That's not what I asked. Have you ever admitted you were wrong about anything? Silence. I didn't think so. Kennedy opened his final major folder. Senator, during your time as Intelligence Committee Chairman, there were numerous leaks of classified information to the media stories that appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN stories that cited sources familiar with the intelligence or congressional sources. He pulled out a stack of news articles, and a remarkable number of those leaks seemed to support exactly the narrative you were pushing publicly. Stories about Trump transition contacts with Russians, about FISA surveillance, stories about Intelligence Committee findings before they were officially released. Kennedy spread the articles across his desk. Senator, did you ever leak classified information to the media? Schiff's response was measured. I have never disclosed classified information inappropriately. That's a lawyer's answer. I asked if you leaked information, not whether it was appropriate, not whether it was classified. Did you provide information to reporters that came from your committee's work? I engaged with the press as part of my oversight responsibilities. Did you leak? I reject the characterization. Kennedy held up his hand. Let me give you a specific example. December 2017, while your committee was conducting closed-door interviews, someone leaked information to CNN about an email that Donald Trump Jr. had received. He pulled out the CNN article. CNN reported as a bombshell that Trump Jr. had received an email on September 4, 2016, with a decryption key to access WikiLeaks documents. The story claimed this proved the Trump campaign had advanced access to stolen documents before they were made public. Kennedy looked up. The story was everywhere. Smoking gun, proof of coordination. CNN went wall to wall with it. He sat down at the article. And it was wrong. The email was dated September 14th, not September 4th. The documents were already public by then. There was no advanced access. There was no smoking gun. CNN had to issue a major correction. Kennedy's voice sharpened. But here's my question, Senator. Who leaked that information to CNN in the first place? Who told them about that email but got the date wrong? Because only people with access to the committee's evidence would have known about that email. Someone with access gave CNN information that was wrong. but wrong in a way that supported the collusion narrative, someone who was more interested in pushing a story than in getting the facts right. He looked directly at Schiff. Any idea who that might have been, Senator? Schiff's face was stone. I have no knowledge of how CNN obtained that information. That's not what I asked. I asked if you have any idea who might have leaked it. You were the ranking member on the committee. You had access to that evidence. You were going on television every day, pushing the collusion narrative. And suddenly, CNN has a bombshell story that supports your narrative but gets the facts wrong. Kennedy gathered the articles. The pattern of leaks from your committee was remarkable, Senator. Almost every major story that advanced the collusion narrative seemed to come from congressional sources, or sources familiar with the intelligence, and you were the most visible person pushing that narrative. I'm not accusing you of anything specific. I don't have proof, but I'll tell you what it looks like from Louisiana. It looks like someone was using selective leaks to manipulate public opinion. It looks like someone was giving reporters information that made the president look guilty, even when the full picture was more complicated. He set down the folder, and the American people deserve to know if their Intelligence Committee chairman was playing games with classified information for political advantage. Kennedy set aside all his folders and removed his reading glasses. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more serious. Senator Schiff, you came here today to talk about maintaining public trust in intelligence oversight. That's the title of this hearing. So let's talk about trust. He paused, gathered his thoughts. For 4 years, you told the American people that the President of the United States was a Russian asset. You said he had conspired with a foreign adversary to steal an election. You said you had seen the evidence with your own eyes. You said it was in plain sight. Millions of Americans believed you, and why wouldn't they? You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had access to classified information that ordinary citizens couldn't see. You spoke with absolute certainty. Kennedy's voice grew heavier. And it wasn't true. The Mueller report found no conspiracy. The transcripts showed your testimony had no direct evidence. The Inspector General found the FBI misled the FISA court 17 times. Everything you told the American people, everything you were so certain about, was wrong. He leaned forward. But here's what really damages trust, Senator. You never admitted you were wrong. When the Mueller report came out, you didn't say, I made a mistake. You said the report actually supported your position. When the transcripts were released, you didn't apologize for hiding them. You attacked the people who declassified them. When the Inspector General found 17 errors, you didn't correct your memo. You just moved on. That's not a mistake. A mistake is when you get something wrong and you acknowledge it. What you did was deliberate. You knew what the transcript said. You knew what you testified under oath, and you kept saying the opposite. Kennedy stood up from his seat and walked to the front of the dais. You want to know what threatens democracy, Senator? I'll tell you. It's when officials with access to classified information use that access to manipulate public opinion. It's when a committee chairman tells the American people he's seen evidence that doesn't exist. It's when someone reads fake quotes in a congressional hearing and calls it parody. It's when someone lies about contacts with whistleblowers. It's when someone writes memos claiming the FBI acted properly, knowing the Inspector General would later find 17 significant errors. It's when someone fights to keep classified transcripts because they contradict his public statements. Kennedy's voice rose. That's what threatens democracy, Senator. Not foreign adversaries, not disinformation from overseas. Officials right here in America, with security clearances and committee chairmanships, using their positions to mislead the public. And that's exactly what you did. He walked back to his seat and gathered his materials. You've spent years claiming you were protecting democracy from Donald Trump, that you were the truth teller, that you were the one standing up to tyranny while everyone else cowered. But history is going to show something different. History is going to show that you did more damage to public trust than almost anyone, because you taught millions of Americans that they can't trust what their leaders tell them, that committee chairmen lie, that evidence doesn't matter if the narrative is right, that certainty is more important than accuracy. Kennedy picked up the stack of transcripts, the 47 television appearances. Some people did something to America's faith in its institutions. Senate, and those people include you. The American people trusted you. You had access to information they couldn't see. And you abused that trust. You lied to them over and over for political advantage. He set down the transcripts. And the worst part? You're not ashamed. You're proud of it. You came here today to lecture us about threats to democracy while embodying those very threats. You still think you were the hero. Kennedy looked at Schiff one final time. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment and your character. He gathered his folders and turned to Chairman Warner. I yield back. The room was frozen for a long moment. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling. The senators sat in stunned silence. The gallery was completely still. Then the dam broke. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers rushed forward. Democratic senators huddled together in urgent whispered conversation. Republican senators sat back, some looking satisfied, others looking almost uncomfortable with what they'd just testified. At the witness table, Adam Schiff sat motionless. His carefully constructed demo had cracked. His face was pale, his jaw tight. The bright certainty that had carried him through 1,000 interviews, 1,000 hearings, 1,000 attacks. It was gone. His communications director was at his elbow, whispering urgently. His chief of staff was on the phone, already in damage control mode. But Schiff wasn't listening. He was staring at the stack of transcripts Kennedy had left on his desk. 47 television appearances, his own words used against him. Chairman Warner banged his gavel, trying to restore order. This hearing is in recess. This hearing is in recess. Schiff stood slowly, mechanically. He gathered his papers, though nothing in them could help him now. His staff formed a protective circle around him as he moved toward the exit. Reporters surged forward. Senator Schiff? Do you have a response? Senator Schiff, were you lying about the evidence? Senator Schiff, will you apologize? He said nothing. He kept walking, eyes forward, face expressionless. As he passed Kennedy's seat, the Louisiana senator was calmly organizing his folders, chatting with an aide about something mundane, lunch plans maybe, or a vote scheduled for the afternoon. Kennedy changed up as Schiff passed. Senator Schiff. Schiff stopped. Their eyes met. Kennedy's expression was almost kind. I meant what I said. It wasn't personal. It was about the truth. And the truth is, you had every opportunity to admit you were wrong, to say, I got it wrong, and I'm sorry. You never took it. He was slightly. That's on you, Senator, not me. Schiff said nothing. He walked out of the hearing room without looking back. The C-SPAN video of the hearing went viral within hours, 45 million views in the first 24 hours. Clips spread across every platform. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Kennedy destroys Schiff became a trending topic. Political commentators dissected every exchange. Late-night hosts, for once, covered a Senate hearing. The mainstream media tried to frame it as a Republican attack. GOP senator launches partisan assault on Schiff's Russia record. Kennedy rehashes debunked accusations. But the framing couldn't contain the reality. The clips were too damaging. Kennedy had used Schiff's own words, his own documents, his own testimony. People could watch for themselves and make up their own minds. The Democratic response was muted, almost embarrassed. Chuck Schumer released a statement calling the hearing a distraction from the real issues facing Americans. He didn't defend Schiff's claims. Nancy Pelosi reached for comment, said only that Adam has always acted in good faith. She didn't say he was right. The 2028 speculation that had surrounded Schiff evaporated overnight. Donors who had been quietly lining up went quiet. Operatives who had been taking his calls stopped returning them. The presidential ambitions he had harbored for years, the reason he had sought the Senate seat in the first place, were finished. Within weeks, Schiff's role in the Senate had diminished drastically. Committee that had seemed certain fell through. Co-sponsors for his legislative assignments became hard to find. Colleagues who had once sought his counsel began avoiding him in the hallways. The political obituaries began appearing, the rise and fall of Adam Schiff, how one hearing ended a political career, the man who cried collusion. Some were sympathetic, portraying him as a true believer who had gotten carried away. Others were harsher, depicting him as a calculating politician who had knowingly misled the public for political gain. All of them agreed on one thing: Kennedy had ended him. 3 months after the hearing, a reporter from The Atlantic tracked down Kennedy in his office. "Senator, do you have any regrets about how you questioned Senator Schiff?" Kennedy was reviewing papers at his desk. He looked up and smiled. "Regrets? Ma'am." I read his own words back to him. I showed him his own documents. I asked him questions about his own statements. If that was unfair, then I don't know what fair is. Some have said you were too harsh, that you were settling political scores rather than seeking the truth. Kennedy set down his pen. "Let me ask you something. For 4 years, Adam Schiff went on television and told the American people their president was a Russian spy. He said he had seen the evidence. He said it was in plain sight. Millions of people believed him because he was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and it wasn't true." He leaned back in his chair. "Now, when that happens, when a senior official misleads the public on something that important, someone needs to ask questions. Someone needs to say, 'Wait a minute, you told us X, but the evidence shows Y. Explain that.' That's not settling scores. That's accountability. Do you think he was deliberately lying, or did he truly believe what he was saying?" Kennedy considered the question. "You know, I've thought about that a lot. And honestly, I don't know. Maybe he convinced himself he was right. Maybe he saw what he wanted to see. Maybe he got so invested in the narrative that he couldn't let go of it even when the evidence went the other way. He alone. But at some point, the difference between lying and self-deception stops mattering. The effect is the same. Millions of people were misled. Trust in institutions was damaged. The country was divided even further. And he never apologized, never admitted he was wrong. That's what gets me. If he had said at any point, 'I got it wrong, and I'm sorry,' I think people would have forgiven him. Americans are generous that way. We understand that people make mistakes." Kennedy shook his head. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't admit he was wrong, even after the Mueller report, even after the transcripts, even after the Inspector General. He kept insisting he was right. And that's not a mistake anymore. That's arrogance. That's pride. That's putting your ego above the truth. The reporter asked one final question. "What do you think your legacy from that hearing will be?" Kennedy thought for a moment. "I hope the legacy is simple, that truth matters, that even powerful people have to answer for what they say, that you can't just go on television and make claims without evidence and expect no one to ever call you on it." He smiled. Adam Schiff spent 4 years telling Americans he had seen evidence that didn't exist, and for 4 years nobody really challenged him on it. The media repeated his claims. His colleagues defended him. He became a hero to half the country. All I did was ask questions. I took his own words, his own documents, and I asked him to explain. That's it. That's all. Kennedy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Capitol dome. The truth is quite simple once you lay it out. He said he saw evidence. The evidence wasn't there. He should have admitted it. He didn't. He turned back to the reporter. Some people did something to America's trust in its institutions. Some people went on television and misled the public about matters of enormous importance. Some people never admitted they were wrong. Kennedy smiled that folksy smile. I just asked questions. The truth did the rest. Adam Schiff served out his Senate term in relative obscurity. He gave several interviews. He avoided the Sunday shows that had once been his second home. His legislation went nowhere. His colleagues were polite, but distant. The presidential campaign he had dreamed of never materialized. When 2028 came around, his name wasn't even mentioned in the speculation. The door that had once seemed so open had closed permanently. Occasionally, interviewers will ask him about the Kennedy hearing. His answers were always the same. The questions were partisan. The framing was unfair. His record spoke for itself. But his record did speak for itself. That was exactly the problem. Years later, historians would assess the Russia collusion narrative and Schiff's role in promoting it. The consensus was harsh. He had made confident claims that weren't supported by the evidence. He had hidden transcripts that contradicted his public statements. He had never acknowledged his errors. Whether he had believed his own claims or had knowingly misled the public remained Americans debated. But the effect was the same either way. Millions had been told something that wasn't true, and the man who had told them had never apologized. The Kennedy hearing became a case study in accountability. How one afternoon of tough questions could expose years of misleading statements. Political science classes study the transcript. Journalism schools use it as an example of how to and how not to cover powerful sources. And John Kennedy, he returned to his work in the Senate. He continued asking uncomfortable questions of witnesses who expected deference. He continued speaking in that folksy Louisiana drawl that made people underestimate him. When asked about the Schiff hearing, he always said the same thing. I just asked questions. I took his own words and asked him to explain them. That's all any of us can do. Ask questions, demand answers, and let the truth speak for itself. He would pause, then add, some people did something. They told the American people things that weren't true. They never apologized, and eventually someone asked them about it. Kennedy would smile. I was happy to be that someone. In the years that followed, trust in institutions continued to be debated. Some blame partisan media, some blame social media, some blame politicians who put party over truth. But those who had watched the Kennedy Schiff heard a simpler truth. Trust is destroyed when leaders lie and refuse to admit it. When powerful people make claims they can't support, when certainty replaces evidence, when narrative trumps facts. Adam Schiff had spent years presenting himself as a defender of democracy, a truth-teller standing against lies. And in one afternoon, in one hearing room, all of that had been stripped away, not because of partisan attacks, not because of unfair questions, but because someone had finally done what should have been done years earlier, taken his words, compared them to the evidence, and asked him to explain. The truth had been there all along in the Mueller report, in the transcripts, in the Inspector General's findings. It just needed someone to ask about it. Some people did something. They asked questions, and the truth set everyone free.